Okay, good afternoon. We call the order the February 15th meeting of the Planning Commission. I'd like to confirm that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call, please?
So with that, I will ask for Commissioner Gilmore, Commissioner Mike Sell, Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Waters.
Here.
Commissioner Bernhardt.
Here.
Chair Hay.
Here.
That give us a quorum of 5 members, and we've provided notice of today's meeting, so that'll give us clearance to move ahead and conduct today's business.
Okay. So hopefully everybody had a chance to take a look at the meeting minutes of February 1st. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the February 1st meeting?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0. Okay, we will now go into new business and public hearings.
For our public hearings this afternoon, we've had an advertised public hearing on applications number Z22-1 and P22-1. Both of those have been filed by Building Kansas LLC, and Z22-1 is requesting a change in zoning district classification from Saline County Ag to R2 multifamily residential, and as a companion application, approval of a preliminary plat on a 53.26 acre tract that's located east of Centennial Rd, between Schilling Rd and Magnolia Rd. And the first part of that consideration is the application to change the zoning classification of the property. So for the benefit of the commission, before we get into that, there were 3 applications that were submitted. The first one was for annexation. That was approved by the City Commission last night, and that was to allow an application for a rural housing incentive district to be considered, which can only be considered if the property is inside the city limits. And so that's been addressed. And now the second question is what the appropriate zoning classification of the property should be. And I'm going to let Mr. Hers address the zoning side.
Thank you. So we'll start with getting the lay of the land and getting some context of where we're located. As Mr. Andrews stated, we are to the east of Centennial Rd and north of Schilling Rd and south of Magnolia in what we call the donut area. So there's an area that is encircled by the city limits and city development that is currently farm ground, and this is a piece of that we're looking at today. So currently you have Saline County Ag to the north, you have Saline County Ag to the east, you have a mini warehouse development and a drainage channel to the west, and then you have the College Park addition, which is 2-family duplex style, townhome style housing to the south of you, the south of the development between Schilling and the south edge of the proposed plat. So the property is a 53-acre property. One of the items that the developers have been working on is obtaining access to a public street because the property itself is currently landlocked. As I mentioned, there's a channel to the west of the property as well as development along Centennial Rd, and there is a levee on the north side of the College Park PDD to the south, and then there's also another channel on the east side. And so to address the landlocked issue, what the developer has done is they've been working with the airport authority to obtain access, and so we have a letter from Mr. Rogers with the airport authority explaining his cooperation and participation in establishing a access point that would become a road that would come in off of Centennial into the proposed subdivision to supply access to the proposed plat and the housing development that the developer is looking to create. The first thing that we tend to look at when we're looking at a rezoning change is the intent and purpose of the zoning district. And in this case, the applicant is requesting R2 zoning, which allows for single-family homes as well as duplexes and townhomes. So we're looking at single units and double units, if you want to look at it that way. The density of that is sort of a lower medium density, up to 14.5 units per acre potentially, and each development has to have a minimum of 3,000 square feet per dwelling unit. And we look at the front yard setbacks. The front yard setback is going to be required to be 25 feet, which is pretty standard for residential development. Side yards are going to be 7.5. Rear yards are going to be 25.5 or 25 feet. And the minimum lot width is 50 feet with a minimum lot depth of 100 feet. And then there is a maximum lot coverage of 35 feet and a maximum structure height of 35 feet as well, or maximum lot coverage of 35% and a maximum height limit of 35 feet. For parking, anytime we look at residential parking, we require 2 parking spaces that are off the street, so 2 off-street parking spaces per dwelling unit. And so with these proposed developments, the applicant has given us a sample floor plan of what they're looking at. So all of these lots are going to have basically 2 units on each of their lots. And this is a prototype or example of what they're proposing to build. And so each of the dwelling units would have 2 off-street parking spaces. In looking at the suitability of the site and the development under the existing zoning, the factor of this deals with whether or not development under the existing agricultural zoning is suitable, and if the current zoning inhibits the development and use of the property. And so currently we do have ag zoning because that's the default zoning when we annex a property into the city, and so that does not allow for subdivision style residential housing, and so the applicant is looking to rezone. And the property is contiguous to a similar zoning district to the south. You have the College Park PDD, and that is old Air Force Base housing, and it has a similar style of development in that you have lots with townhomes and duplex type structures on them with a similar density of what's being proposed. So there are similar attributes in the neighborhood. There is also existing utilities in the area, and I'll turn on the utility layer here. So there's a 12-inch water line that runs along the north edge of the property that can be accessed to supply water for the residents of this development. There's also a 16-inch force main that runs along the south edge, but because it's a force main, you can't tap into it with a gravity feed line. You have to have pumps. And so the idea is to gravity feed, if we can, to a line that is in the southeast corner of the development where I'm kind of pointing my cursor there. So ideally, this would be the location in which they could gravity feed all the sewer to then take care of the sanitary sewer system. And the property is outside of the 100-year floodplain. There is floodplain in the vicinity, which is one of the reasons that the donut area, as it's affectionately called, has not been fully developed to this point in time. And I'll just pull that up just so you can see. So the floodplain and floodway are the blue shades that you see there. And that area is north of where we're proposing to develop with the proposed subdivision. The biggest limitation that the site has is connectivity. As we mentioned earlier, the site is currently landlocked, and so there is no way in and out currently, and what the applicant is proposing to do is to provide access off of Centennial with a road here that would be basically working with the airport authority to have dedicated as right-of-way so that you can get into the subdivision. There's also going to be a secondary emergency access lane off of the north end of Foxborough. So Foxborough has a cul-de-sac that dead ends to a levee. There's a levee system here, and so there would be an emergency access point for ambulances or fire trucks or police or other emergency vehicles in the event that they need to get up into the subdivision through another access point. So this would be a path where you would go in, drive up on top of the levee, over the levee, and then connect to the street system. One of the things that staff is talking with the applicant about, and Mr. Andrew will get into more when we actually talk about the plat a little more, is increasing connectivity so that in the future, as the whole area around here develops, most likely to the north and to the east, that there is connectivity to where we can eventually access the property from Magnolia and from Centennial. So that is the future goal and plan, is to increase the connectivity of the area so that we have more than just the location on Centennial that's being proposed. Character of the neighborhood, as I mentioned, the character of the proposed development is very similar to some other housing that's in the area, primarily to the south. And so we do have similar sized properties with similar style developments. And we also have the utilities and services in close proximity. We've talked about the water, sanitary, and sanitary sewer. The next criteria that we look at with public utilities is the storm drainage. And anytime we have a new subdivision plat, the engineer for that subdivision is required to do a drainage study and develop a designed stormwater system that would function to make sure that nobody within the subdivision is flooding. We do have Dry Creek to the east, which is where the water would drain to. We will need a study to see if there's any detention required along with getting water to Dry Creek here, West Dry Creek, but that's how this storm drainage system would work. Emergency service for this particular property would be from Fire Station number 3, which is on Belmont, and the residents would be served by USD 305 through the Schilling School District, which then funnels into South Middle and South High School. The 12-inch water line, we would note that was constructed, does have a benefit fee that was due of $115,371. So as part of development of the site, there is a recovery fee for the benefit district for that line. This area is also serviced by Evergy as part of their service territory. For street access, we will have access off of Centennial, as well as hopefully in the future up to Magnolia. The conformance with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan shows this property as being part of the suburban residential land use classification. Let's pull that up here. And so that's the yellow that you see here. So this is part of the suburban residential classification. That classification has a primary use of single-family homes with secondary uses as duplexes and townhomes, and allows for densities of a lower to medium range with the ranges being 4 to 8 units. The proposed development plan would have 330 dwellings as it sits today, 165 lots, each with duplexes on them, so 330 dwellings, which comes out to 6.2 dwelling units per acre. So it is within the range that future land use designation allows. And the location criteria, we are on the edge of existing developments because we do have the College Park addition to the south. We're also connected off of Centennial and Arterial, so we would meet the locational and development criteria. For your findings, on page 7, staff does have 5 findings that we found that are kind of summarize what we've gone through. The alternatives that the Planning Commission would have is you could recommend approval of the applicant's request for R2 zoning, subject to satisfactory platting of the property in the individual building lot. Number 2 is you could recommend a lesser change, such as an R1 zoning district versus the requested R2. You could also recommend that consideration of this application be postponed if additional information is needed. And you could also recommend denial of the rezoning request, providing appropriate findings are made. Staff has gone through this, and we would recommend approval of the applicant's zoning request subject to satisfactory completing of the platting of the property into individual building lots, which is the next item that we'll talk about on our agenda. We also have an attachment number 2, which is at the end of the staff report, that goes through the findings or criteria that new rezoning cases are to follow, which kind of lines up with our staff report, but it's in there so that you can read that, and if you have any questions, we can talk about that. So with that, staff will take any questions that you have about our report or the applicant's rezoning case.
Yeah, I have a few questions, actually. It says list of exhibits, plans submitted, plat maps, traffic study, and drainage study, and I don't have any of those in the packet.
Okay. I don't believe that we have the full traffic study, or do we, Dean?
Are you referring to the plat, or are you referring to the rezoning request?
On the zoning map, it says list of exhibits submitted. Plat maps, traffic study, drainage study. Number 15 on the application.
On the application page, you mean that the applicant submitted?
Correct, for the zoning.
Okay.
Those are all relevant to the preliminary plat application,
Okay.
which is the next, it's item 3.1B, and those are not in your packet because they're not ready for your review yet as it relates to the plat layout. So the question before you on this item is whether a residential zoning designation and an R2 density is appropriate zoning classification for this property, and then we'll address the plat layout and issues associated that with the next item.
Okay. I think on this one specifically, it'd be beneficial to see the plat because, I don't know, is the fire marshal taking a look at the emergency access? Because if we go off the emergency access policy, that emergency access will not work because it's too close. It needs to be a minimum of at least, I believe, 1,100 feet is what I figured up, away from the initial entrance.
The fire marshal has reviewed the emergency access and is agreeable to their plan for emergency access.
Okay.
But
Even though
we
it goes
didn't-
against code.
we didn't really intend for Mr. Hers to be displaying this or having this up there because this is not ready for your consideration.
Okay. And then,
But the plan is to have one primary way in and then have an emergency access and then look at opportunities for additional future access.
okay.
So this is not like some other subdivisions where you have rivers or barriers or things where there's simply no other way. In this case, there's other ways in the future to get into this subdivision. They're just not there yet. But it's not something that's precluded from having more than one access point in the future.
Could you please elaborate on how that'd be possible with the dry creek on the right, flood dike on the south, and floodplain on the north?
Yeah, if you want to put up the master plan, Dustin, or just the aerial photo. So someday Virginia Drive is going to come down like this, and it's going to tie in here. So it will be possible to construct a road from here over to Virginia Drive, and that would provide that. We would certainly never recommend a development layout for this property that didn't bring a street down from Magnolia to tie into the north end of this property. So that would be 1, that would be 2, and this would be 3. And there's even a possibility of a road coming up, and this is a potential possibility. This is also owned by the Airport Authority, and it's how the cell tower is accessed. It might also be possible to construct a second connection to Centennial Rd there in the future, but this is not like some properties that there's no prospect of having any second street in, because there's no topographical barriers like rivers or cutoff channels or things that would prevent an additional access points in. It's just a question of timing and coordination, not physical barriers.
Okay.
But those are still a work in progress as far as the plat layout and those things. So as Mr. Herz laid out for you, there's the options that we provided is that you can make a recommendation on the zoning as the suitable density and land use, or you can defer making a recommendation on the zoning until there is a preliminary plat layout that goes with it. So those are options that have been put forward to the Planning Commission. As far as looking at the R2 and how it relates to what's around it in the College Park, especially to the south, and the fact that you have commercial and industrial to the west, staff, notwithstanding anything that does with the plat or connectivity or those things, it seemed to us that the R2, and I don't know if you had a zoning map there, Dustin. So this is PDD-R2, this is R2 over here. They're requesting R2 here, and just looking at it from a zoning land use perspective, staff felt that the R2 zoning being requested was compatible and consistent with the residential densities that are around it. So that is staff's recommendation as to the requested zoning classification. The actual plat layout and the elements of the plat will address in item 3.1B.
Can you pull out from that a little bit more?
Yeah. So you have similar housing that continues on the south side of Schilling as well. So this blue that you see is a continuation of that zoning. Then you have this light brown color that's also R2. The dark brown color is R3 over here. And then you have the commercial activities along South 9th Street. So those are the pink and reds.
Go up north a little bit. Okay. One more. Okay. Thank you.
So the area that has no color on it is the area that we refer to as the donut hole because it's surrounded on all sides but is hollow in the middle.
Okay.
So Dean, all we're actually doing right now on this is just getting the classification for the zoning only, nothing, no plating, no nothing else, so we're just
So what-
looking at the rezoning.
What you're saying is you're making your best recommendation. So again, to refer you to page 7 and 8, as Mr. Hers outlined, your first alternative would be to look at the application for R2, which is townhome zoning, and you could recommend approval of townhome zoning subject to satisfactory plating of the property. So what that recommendation means is that if they never come up with a plat that is satisfactory, then the zoning will not change. It's a recommendation subject to that. The second option was if you don't think this is appropriate for townhomes and it's only appropriate for single family, you could make that recommendation because that's a lesser change than what's requested. You could recommend that this be postponed to a date either to get additional information, or you can say that you want to allow time for revisions to be made to the plat layout prior to considering the R2 zoning request, or you could recommend denial of changing the zoning of this property to residential at all. So what we've tried to do is which is fairly standard, is that the zoning change of any property does not take effect unless there's a satisfactory plat for laying it out and developing it. So the action on the zoning would be to tell the applicant that you view the land use of townhomes as appropriate, subject to having a suitable layout that addresses all your concerns. Or you could say, we don't want to consider the land use till we see the plat layout. So those are choices, or you can say you'd rather see single family and not townhome.
Okay. I just have a hard time even making a decision on a rezone without a traffic study or drainage study at that to see if it's even feasible for residential, I guess.
Well, there has been a traffic study submitted, there has been a drainage study submitted, there has been a plat submitted. Staff has reviewed those, and there's some items related to each of those things that we are working through with the applicant and their design team, and we don't think they're in a position yet to bring forward to you to have all of our analysis and conclusions of those things. But they have done a drainage study that shows how the runoff and detention will be handled in the southeast. They have done a traffic analysis of Centennial Road and this future intersection with Centennial Road. They have done a plat layout, and there's a number of things related to this property and all the easements associated with that we want the design engineer to address before we feel comfortable bringing it in front of the commission for any kind of action. So those are really the three choices. Is you could tell the applicant that you're comfortable with the plan for constructing townhomes subject to having a workable plat. If they never have a workable plat, they'll never have the zoning change. You could tell them you're not comfortable with townhomes, you'd rather see single family, or you could say you're not comfortable making a recommendation on the zoning until you see the plat layout and those things.
Okay, anybody else got any more questions for staff?
I do have just one, and it's just more kind of to make sure that we're talking the correct direction. On page 5, where it talks about storm drainage, the runoff is going which way? To the east or to the west?
To the east.
Okay. On the report, it said runoff from the future development will be directed to the west.
Good catch, thank you.
Yes, I think that's a transposition because of the fact that it's West Dry Creek.
yeah.
It's West Dry Creek, but it's east side of the property.
Yeah, it
This-
just says directed west over to
This-
West Dry Creek.
This is not West Dry Creek. This is West Dry Creek.
Right.
And this channel has some capacity issues that we're working on related to the Tony's Pizza expansion, so we
Right.
don't want runoff going to the west there. We want it going to the east.
That was my question, since it said was directed west. Okay. So, as long as we make that correction within it, so. I don't have any more questions.
Anybody else?
The other thing also on that page 5 is that because of there was a split off with the property east of West Dry Creek, which is over here, that was included in the initial estimate for the benefit fee. So when Mr. Hers reported that that's actually $115,000, not $145,000 as written in the report, because that $145,000 included this property on the other side right here, which is not part of this development.
Okay.
Okay, would the applicant like to, or representative of the applicant like to say anything?
Thank you. I'm Gary Hobby. I happen to be working with the developers on the project. Come onto this project a little bit later, and so I've been able to put some input into what's going on. We appreciate what Mr. Hers and Mr. Andrew have done with as far as our preliminary plat is concerned, and we're excited about moving forward with our project. Our project is going to be a townhome type system. They're a 2-story unit with a duplex type style on each lot. And we're excited about doing this type of a project in a community that has not been done for quite some time. If you happen to be in the Lindsborg area and in the northeast portion of that town, there's a new subdivision called Stockholm Estates. Those units that you see in Stockholm Estates will be very similar to what we'd be doing here in the Salina area. So we would request that go ahead and ask that the Planning Commission approve our zoning R2 subject to the plat, which is under review and under redesign. We've had some great input from Mr. Hers and Mr. Andrew, and so we're redeveloping some of the area, and we'll bring back a plat here within the next few weeks and hopefully move the project forward. I'll be glad to stand for any questions if you have any.
Okay,
Thank you.
Gary. Are we on Zoom?
We are on Zoom.
Okay, is there any public comment on this? Anybody like to say anything?
We do not have anyone on Zoom unless there's somebody in the room who would like to share their thoughts on the application.
Since there's no public comment, we'll bring it back up to the commission for action.
I guess at least for discussion part of it. I mean, I think that it's probably a good use of the R2 in this situation. I mean, I agree with you on.
I think it's good. I just don't think it's ready yet. Yeah, that's.
I think for this
yeah.
stage, getting it to the R2 so that they can move forward with the plating would be a good idea. So I'd make a motion to approve, which one are we on? Application
Z22.
Z22-1 with satisfactory plating of the property.
I second it.
Okay, we have a second, or we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
That passes 4-1. Okay, we'll move down to application P22-1.
So this was the companion application that was filed. Again, we had a request for annexation. The recommendation that you just made, I think, is helpful to the applicant and developer to know that the commission is receptive to the townhome type development so that they don't have to alter that part of their plan. This is an application for preliminary plat of unplatted property. You've got the Schilling subdivision number 5 on the west, the College Park Plan Development District, residential development to the south. West Dry Creek forms the east boundary, and you've got a flood control levee on the south. On the west, you have an abandoned railroad right-of-way and an unnamed drainage channel. Just for point of reference, this property is 1,600 feet north of Schilling Rd, and it's 220 feet east of Centennial Rd. So the City Commission did approve an ordinance annexing this property into the city last evening. The initial plan that we have subdivides this property into 165 residential building lots. You multiply that by 2 units per lot, you're talking 330 housing units. We don't know for sure that we'll end up right at that number. That was the number on the initial submittal. One of the things that you look at in terms of subdivision design is that every subdivision is supposed to have frontage on a direct access perimeter street. Our policy also directs the Planning Commission to look at the need for additional emergency access points into the subdivision. So in addition to the one direct access point, the subdivision regulations state that a new subdivision shall have any additional means of access in and out of the subdivision either by direct street connection or indirectly to existing streets as are determined necessary by the Planning Commission. So as we discussed in concept, it's possible to design this so that there's the ability to have a future street connection to the north, a future street connection to the east, which would have the need to have a culvert or crossing over West Dry Creek, but it's certainly doable. And so the number and the means of street connection to adjoining lands is what is determined necessary by you as the Planning Commission. So, as Mr. Hers referred to, presently this is landlocked with no frontage or access to a perimeter street. To address this, we have the consent of the Salina Airport Authority to provide a direct street connection over to Centennial Rd. Part of what you'll be looking at is the design for that, the design for the intersection with Centennial Rd. How wide does it need to be? Does it need to have turn lanes? Does Centennial Rd need to have turn lanes? Those are all things that you will be looking at when you consider the plat portion of this. And to provide a second means of emergency access, the developers are proposing to construct an emergency access road from the north end of Foxborough Drive into the subdivision. We're going to work with the applicant and their designers to try to have future street connections that connect outward, for sure to the north, possibly to the east. We have received the preliminary plat submittal. It's been reviewed by the city's development review team. It's also been reviewed by the area utility providers and by the county surveyor. And our recommendation at this point is to postpone consideration of that plat either to your March 1st or March 15th meeting. And just for way of information, the items that need to be addressed prior to your consideration is we have a traffic study. We have some identified revisions to that traffic study, and it's intended to address the difference between townhomes versus single-family homes and what impact that has on traffic and the neighboring streets. The original plan we had, both the planning staff, engineering staff, and the fire department didn't think there was enough internal and external connectivity as far as providing multiple points of access to individual building lots. There is a drainage study and a drainage plan that has been submitted. It's under review and has not yet been approved by the city engineer. We would hope to have that approval and analysis of that for you. And the plans for extension of public utilities must be reviewed and approved by the Director of Utilities. We would need to have that for you There is a Evergy transmission line that goes through this property, as well as a high-pressure gas pipeline. And so all those items need to be clearly identified by the surveyor on the plat. And then we would want to have a revised plat that contained all those revisions submitted to the planning staff prior to the agenda deadline before we brought it back to you. So the reason we're recommending postponement is that as some of those things that you have identified, the traffic study has been submitted but needs some additional work. The staff felt that the original street plan didn't have enough connectivity internally and externally, and there needs to be a clear plan for connection and extension of public utilities. There's a Evergy transmission line and a gas pipeline that certainly affect the plat layout, and so we are recommending that those things be satisfactorily addressed before we bring the plat back for you to look at. Because you can't very well ask questions about the drainage study if we don't present it to you. We can't ask questions about the traffic study if we don't present it to you. And you can't ask questions about connectivity if we don't give you a layout that shows what the connectivity is. We just don't think that the plat layout itself is ready for your consideration or for staff to make a recommendation on. So our recommendation on P22-1 is to postpone it to March 1st or March 15th. Those would be your next two meeting dates. And if there is anything else that the items 1 through 6, there are things that staff identified. If there are things that individual planning commissioners or the entire planning commissioner would like to see addressed or provided, now would be the time to identify additional things that you would like to see before the plat comes before you for action.
Okay, do we have any questions for staff on this?
Just one, which I'm sure you have, but if you could just include a response from Troy Long on to make sure they're able to drive the long trucks over a dike, and that emergency access will work.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I guess this question is for Gary. Is there any difference between the March 1st and March 15th? Is that going to be a...
Thank you, Commissioners. Gary Harvey again. Yes, we would like to move forward just as quickly as possible. The engineer's record is working on plat and finalizing some layout as we speak, and our hope is that we can be here by the 1st. Part of the reason we want to do that is we would like to break ground this summer, if all possible, on construction and have some units completed by the end of this year. We know that there is a shortage of housing within our community, and there's some great jobs coming to our community, and so we hope to be beneficial to the community by having some additional townhome style projects rather than just some regular single family homes. So we're shooting for the March 1st deadline to get the paperwork and final plat or preliminary plat, excuse me, to staff at an appropriate time.
Okay. Okay, any questions for Gary? Nope. Okay, I see we have nobody on Zoom. Anybody from the public that would like to comment on this? Okay, if not, I will bring it back to the commission for a motion or more discussion.
I'd make a motion to postpone consideration of the application P22-1 until the next available meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to postpone the application P22-1. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Passes 5-0. Okay. That brings us to 3.2, application Z22-2.
We have a couple companion items here that were filed by Mr. Mark Augustine, who's the member of Property 6 LLC. They kind of tie together, but the first one is a request to rezone a piece of property that's presently agricultural to Plan C5, Plan Service Commercial with the corridor overlay. The property we're talking about is directly across the street to the south of the proposed home addition, which you reviewed earlier. And this is in a similar situation where it was annexed into the city in 1999. Utilities were extended, but the property was given an agricultural designation and was not platted at that time. And the reason for doing that was by remaining unplatted and agricultural, the owner was able to have the benefit of utilities but not have a 15-year agricultural deferral of special assessments. So this is an application for Plan C5 zoning within the corridor overlay district. And Dustin, I think we have a separate map for the corridor overlay district.
Yes, let me pull that up real quick.
So the corridor overlay district was created in 1999, and it was created in response to a desire for some locations of automobile dealerships that had internal locations within the heart of the city that wanted to move out to South 9th Street locations, and so the overlay district was designed to accommodate them, but to prevent things like a Walmart or Target or other things developing on that segment of South 9th Street. And so this property lies within that red area, which is the retail commercial portion of the South 9th overlay. This is the industrial portion here, and the red area is designed for commercial, service commercial uses. This property is owned by the Eldon Miller Trust, but it's under contract to a potential buyer, Mr. Augustine. He's interested in developing this site with a travel center, accessory RV parking, and possibly mini warehouses. This 25-acre site is vacant. It's used for agricultural purposes now. He's filed this application to rezone the entire site to PC5 to allow commercial development, but his plans are very conceptual, and he has not submitted any sort of preliminary site development plan. So the property has been zoned A1 since it came into the city in 1999, but it's never been platted. As we discussed on the previous item, the zoning ordinance requires that land be subdivided in accordance with the subdivision regulations prior to rezoning any area to any district other than A1. I can name probably a half a dozen cases where the Planning Commission has made a recommendation for a property zoning to be changed, and it ended up that the property never got final platted, and that zoning change never took effect. So I believe it was 2006, the Planning Commission recommended that the pumpkin patch on the west side of South 9th be rezoned to commercial. The transaction fell through, the property was never platted, and the zoning never changed. It stayed agricultural, and then it was changed when it was zoned and platted in 2018. So just as the prior item, you're making a recommendation, your best recommendation on the land use, but if the property is never final platted, then that zoning change doesn't take effect. So, and as with the previous item, ordinarily there's a requirement that a preliminary plat, a drainage study, all be filed concurrently with a zoning application. Mr. Augustine is attempting to purchase this property, and he wants assurances that he can use this property for his intended uses before he completes the purchase of the property from the Eldon Miller Trust. So due to the contingency that he has in the purchase contract, planning staff agreed to process the rezoning application with the understanding that platting will occur once ownership is transferred to Mr. Augustine. So we've outlined for you in the report what the South Ninth Overlay District is about. The list of uses, there's a couple things that are unique about it. On all properties that are in the overlay district, the final site plan for each parcel has to be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission before any development occurs. There's some requirements relating to architectural design of buildings, about sharing driveway locations. And so driveway separation requirements, some sign limitations that are slightly different. The other thing is that any conditional use that's not specifically requested by the applicant up front as part of their initial zoning hearing, that requires a separate application and a new public hearing. The other thing that this district allows is you can request and receive deviations from setbacks, lot coverage, structure height, other types of deviations. So the Hilton Garden Inn is in the South Ninth Overlay District. The height limit in this district is 50 feet. The Hilton Garden Inn is 62 feet tall. The Planning Commission approved a deviation from the 50-foot height limit for that project. So we have 1,250 feet of frontage on 9th Street, 800 feet of frontage on Waterwell Road. The applicant believes that this is a prime commercial site given its location at two major arterial streets and its visibility from the interstate. The corridor study recognized the lack of available sites in the community for large land users such as automobile dealerships, and so that's what this was designed to accommodate. And so this was extended to the Miller property because it was included in the South Ninth Utilities Benefit District and annexed into the city. So as far as the character of the neighborhood, this is at the south end of a growing commercial corridor. It occupies a corner of two major arterials. There's I-3 zoning to the east with the Great Plains Kubotas facility. There's interstate exposure on the west. You recently approved a similar zoning change on the home addition on the north side of Waterwell. And then we have the roadway in site to the south, which is also zoned Plan C5. You have a letter at your places there from the owner of that property to the south expressing his support for this application. We do have adequate water, sewer, gas, electric, all in place to serve commercial development. We don't think that the change in zoning classification or use is going to put any increased burden on public facilities and services because fire protection's already be provided this far south already. It's already, emergency access is responding to calls in the vicinity. The street access points, traffic control, utility extensions, and drainage will be addressed in detail in the plat review. The requested zoning is consistent with the corridor overlay district and the comprehensive plan. And so one thing we would want the applicant to do is to clarify any items listed on the conditional use list that he may wish to include in this request. So Dustin, if you could put on the screen if you could just start with the permitted uses, please.
Sure.
So without any additional action or request by the applicant, these are the 6 uses that are permitted by right in the corridor overlay. And so obviously you have Long MacArthur Ford and Marshall Motors that fit under number 1 as well as number 2. We don't have any boat or RV sales or furniture showrooms or truck sales and service presently in the corridor overlay. So if you could go to the next item, Dustin. So these are conditional uses, and what we did with the application for the home edition is we asked the applicant to look at these at the hearing and inform the Planning Commission of any of these uses that they want to have incorporated into their planned district. And if you want to keep going, Dustin. So the uses in black are uses that are presently on the list. The uses in red are uses not presently on the list that Mr. Augustine wants to add to the list of uses allowed within the overlay. And those are 3 uses that he's interested in using on this property. So again, if we go back to, I believe it's on page 5, we have had cases where a user's come back later and applied separately for a conditional use permit because it wasn't included in the initial approval, but this would be the time for Mr. Augustine to share not only the uses that don't currently appear on the list, but any uses that he would like to see added that were not applied for. So we're in a very similar circumstance to the home edition across the street. What's being requested here is consistent with the zoning pattern along this corridor and with the corridor overlay. We would just need some assistance from the applicant about requesting any other uses from that conditional use list. So any of those uses identified there, if they were not approved specifically today, he could always come back in the future and apply for a conditional use permit to develop those. So essentially the applicant's requesting that the requirement to submit a preliminary plat and a site development plan with their request be deferred. In the case of the home edition, we had a plat, but we didn't have a site plan. The site plan was deferred. If you wish to make a recommendation on the request for zoning, we've identified some conditions there that the uses would be limited to those permitted uses plus any conditional uses requested and approved by the Planning Commission. That signage would be limited to the corridor overlay sign limitations. That a final site plan would have to come back for any building sites created on the Miller tract, and that a final plat would have to be approved before final zoning approval for the site. So the difference between this and the last one case that you had is that there is a plan for a preliminary plat to come forward on the Aeroplanes property. On this property, Mr. Augustine is requesting deferral of submitting a plat till he knows that the Planning Commission is supportive of his intended uses for the property. And if the Planning Commission is not supportive, then he would not move through with the purchase, and there wouldn't be any reason to submit a plat or a site plan. So the first question for today is whether you think that the planned C5 zoning is the correct zoning classification of this property with the platting and site plan deferred, and those would have to be reviewed and approved by the commission before any actual development occurred. But this is being requested to see if there's support for Mr. Augustine's intended uses of this property. So with that, I would be open to any questions about the request for Plan C5 zoning.
Dean, I guess I'm lost on the map. When several months ago back, we approved an ag center or an ag sales place. Where's that?
Can you zoom out, Dustin? And I don't, do you have the zoning map for this area? Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit confusing, is that this is, we haven't had time to change our map, but this is formerly the home edition, which was A1, and you recommended approval. It's now PC5. This is the Eldon Miller Trust tract here that we're discussing today. This is where the Roadway Inn Motel is, and this property right here was the proposed site of the Agri Center. Okay. You did work through that and make some recommendations on that, but the Agri Center business owners eventually withdrew the plat before the city commission annexed or zoned it or did anything. So this remains just as it is. It's outside the city limits and it's got agricultural zoning. So this is no longer in play, but we're up here on this tract here, which used to look different before the interchange ramp was put in. So
okay, thank you. That's just
and then
sure
this right here is the home edition, which you reviewed earlier this
okay,
or late last year, and you worked on this through the fall, but it did not come to pass.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions for staff? Mark, would you like to, the applicant like to step forward, and anybody have any questions for the applicant, or does the applicant have anything to add?
Well, if I understand correctly, we're just talking about the zoning at this time. Dustin, I just sent you an email with a conceptual plan if they're interested in seeing that. It's very preliminary, but it gives you some idea about what we're thinking about. I thought I'd sent that to him prior to the meeting, but I apologize.
I do have one question real quick. You were looking to do short-term RV parking?
Correct. That's a possibility.
Okay, what do you define short-term? Just for clarification.
Well, what we worked out in Abilene, I don't know if you've seen our facility there in Abilene, Kansas.
I've seen pictures, yes. Yeah.
We are allowing up to 7 days.
Okay. Okay.
So when in December, you recommended a text amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow for short-term RV parking accessory to a travel center or to a truck stop or to hotels or motels through a conditional use. And so that was approved in the C5 and C7 districts, but it was not included in this corridor overlay district, so Mr. Augustine is requesting that it be added. And so, were you able to locate that, Dustin?
Not yet. We're trying to get our email to work on this computer.
I thought you readily had access to it over there. I guess with that, I don't have any other comments about the zoning. I think as Dean said, it meets all the criteria along the South Ninth Corridor there. I do have some comments when we get to the conditional uses, and that we can talk about after we
Okay.
review that.
I know you're trying to multitask, Dustin, but did you put up the list of conditional uses on the screen?
You want me to address that now, Dean, or?
Yeah, I think that we've got the ones that aren't there yet. We have the ones that are there. So if you could scroll back to one.
So did I
John.
understand you that I need to potentially acknowledge those today that we might consider?
Well, there's two options.
Okay.
So anything that you don't request at the initial public hearing, you can always come back later and apply for separately. But what we did with the home address and across the street is we just looked at these, and the applicant informed the planning commission that they foresaw perhaps wanting to do. So I'm on the conditional uses number 1, Dustin.
The permitted uses are a guaranteed.
They're a guaranteed use. So all those are going to come into the district automatically.
Right.
So you may request any of these in the black text there that you think you might want to include within your district, and those would be rolled in as permitted uses. Or if they're not rolled in as permitted uses, you can always come back in a few years and say, well, I've got this fitness center that wants to build on this lot here and apply for that separately.
Right.
But you could look at this list here and tell the planning commission, I think that on this site I might also want to do hotels and motels, or I might also want to do some of those other uses, and then those would be incorporated in up front, and you wouldn't have, so when the ordinance is eventually developed for this property, those would be listed as permitted instead of having to be applied for separate.
So as I go through that list and not knowing what the future holds necessarily, but thinking about retail and what's going on in that area of town, I see agriculture implement sales being a possibility, building supply stores, convenience, gasoline and food stores, and gasoline service stations with car wash. We're just expanding that with the truck stop, just to clarify that trucks would be on the property. Farm and ranch supply stores a possibility. Food stores, number 10. Number 14, hotels and motels. We do have that in our conceptual plan. Restaurants. And then warehouses and wholesale houses. I see that as just many storage warehouses, just an extension of that. So I think the only real addition that I'm adding to the conditional uses is the RV park, the temporary RV park. The other ones are just the expansion of the definition as I see it. So.
Hey, Dean, real quick, can you give me an example of what constitutes a mini warehouse?
Mini warehouse would be like we looked at over on Centennial Rd, that's just to the west of the property that you looked at before. Mini warehouse is essentially a metal building that's divided up into units with individual door openings and all that.
Okay.
The difference is, last meeting you looked at a warehouse for Ashley Furniture. That is a true warehouse.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a single building, it's a single use or user. It's generally a large building. So
So this is like,
that is
storage
a
rental
warehouse. A
houses.
mini warehouse is what you're seeing in this picture, where it's a building that's divided up into individual storage units with individual
gotcha.
doors.
Okay.
And so that
I'm just
that
used
is
to it as mini
that's
storage.
defined
I
as
gotcha.
a different use than a warehouse,
Okay. Yep,
because
no
it's
problem.
made up of a complex of multiple uses.
So mini warehouses are not currently in the conditional use then?
Many warehouses are not currently in the conditional use, and so all these discussions blend together, but what we were doing was the first decision point was to have the commission decide whether a Plan C5 is the appropriate zoning for this property. And then once you made that determination, if the answer was yes, then we would look at what could potentially be added to that Plan C5 district. So the first item is whether this property should be zoned from agricultural to Plan C5 with those stipulations. And the existing list of uses that Mr. Augustine identified, and then if your reaction to that is positive, then the next item would be to look at those 3 uses in red and see which, if any of those, you think it's appropriate to add. So we thought, in terms of ordering these, that the first decision point was whether it should be zone PC5 as part of the overlay. And if you said yes, then we go to the next step and say what specific uses should be in there. So.
Have any other questions for me at this time? Okay.
So I guess my only question is, and again, as we're moving forward, since we're kind of taking these separate and together, but if we go into the conditional uses, say that number 15, the mini warehouses, I'm assuming that's one that you're going to want put in there. Is that correct?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
So the ones in red are the ones that are not presently allowed in the overlay, and Mr. Augustine is requesting that they be allowed within the overlay.
So if we disallowed that, does that still keep your interest in this property?
That would diminish my interest in it.
Okay.
These are all things that we do day to day in our development projects, so that's why we're interested in the property.
So then I guess my question would be is, on the mini warehouses, I mean, to me, there's a huge difference between a warehouse type situation that we approved last time and a mini storage type situation. If 15 is a no-go, I mean, I can see 19 and 21 on there. I guess I have issues with number 15 in this area.
Okay.
What would be your reasoning for it, and how does that fit into this area?
Well, I think it fits into the area as in the previous presentation. There's housing development going on in South Salina. There's going to be more need for self-storage. But if you look along Interstate 135 and I-70, there's a lot of commercial property developed with mini warehouses or self-storage. And if they're done correctly, I think they look good as you go down the road. Storage business needs visibility just like any other retail business, and that's how we run our retail mini storage warehouse business. So we'll develop a good looking site if that's what we choose to do at the end, but it all kind of depends once we get ownership of it, is to see what wants to develop there with us. And if that acreage is left to where nobody wants it, then that would be something we'd want to consider to develop there.
So Mr. Hers is going to find a way to access that drawing that was emailed so that we can display that. But there's no reason, since these obviously blend together, the reason that we have these as companion items as 22-2 and 22-2A is that what we've discussed is that the companion request is that the travel center truck stop is kind of a different level than just a standard convenience store with gasoline sales. The scale is larger. It involves truck parking and generally involves a larger area. The short-term recreational vehicle parking was just approved for the C5 and C7 areas, but not necessarily in this overlay. So the request is to expand that, and then the mini warehouses. And so what we talked about was that this is a zoning text amendment. It would expand the list of uses, and it would be applicable throughout the corridor area, not just Mr. Augustine's property. So the original rationale for the overlay district was to require a higher aesthetic and architectural standards within this corridor because it's a highly visible gateway into the community from the south, and also try to get high traffic generating uses away from this because you've got industrial truck traffic on the east side with, you don't want to have big box retail with lots of high traffic on the west side conflicting with that. And so we have a very short list of permitted uses, which are low traffic generation uses. There's a longer list of conditional uses. Those have higher levels of trip generation. By making them conditional, that allows the commission to decide which ones can be approved on a case-by-case, location-by-location basis. Mr. Augustine is asking to add the 3 uses that are highlighted in red there. And so those would still have to be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission on a case-by-case, location-by-location basis based on a specific plan. So the idea is that you could add a use. The use would be a permitted use, but where that use locates within the district, the site plan, that is subject to Planning Commission review and approval. So if there was a use and the use was going to be right on the visible corner and you didn't think that was the appropriate location for it, you could vote not to deny, or to deny that use in that location. So what it essentially does is it makes it an eligible use, but it still has to be approved by the Planning Commission. So as we pointed out, that we already have convenience stores and fast food restaurants, and so we're supportive of adding uses if they go through the same review process as convenience stores and restaurants. Our concern was the mini warehouses, because mini storage are not really traffic dependent businesses. They don't need a high level of arterial street exposure. A lot of our mini storage complexes are not in prime commercial corridors or at interchange locations. So we requested, and Mr. Augustine has provided additional information as to why he sees this as a suitable location for many warehouses instead of more traffic dependent commercial uses. But in the past, planning staff has received some criticism for approving many warehouses in what some people view as visible gateway locations where maybe they don't need to be on or in the gateway, and so we just point that out for the commission's consideration. So I've got my pointer here if you want to kind of.
Think I'm qualified there, Dean?
I think you're qualified to press that button and kind of walk the commission through.
All right. That's the hotel that's conceptual idea. And then this is our travel center here. Gasoline customers would come in and circle through the site. Trucks would come in this way and come through the islands and come back out onto 9th Street. And then we have access here and I think right down here for the storage. So the storage is taking up the area right there. Like I said, this is a very quick and dirty drawing the architect put together for me to kind of give you something to visualize. It's by no means how it may end up. It's just an idea, so a concept.
So on the south side of that, would that be parking or would that be the RV temporary
The
parking?
RV would go right in here. He failed to mark that as what I had in mind.
For the hotel, but what
Right.
about for like the RV parking, the short term?
Right there.
Oh, that's in through that area?
Right.
Okay.
And there's a detention pond down here, and that we might get access to the one that's right to the south. Of course, we got truck parking over here as well. So
the Agri-Center group was not, they chose not to try to work that out, but we pointed out at the time, the pond that's behind the roadway in is about 10 times the size capacity of what it needs to be. So if an arrangement could be worked out with them, there wouldn't be a reason for Mr. Augustine to have his own pond. If he had an arrangement, they could easily send their runoff into that existing pond, which is way oversized.
You know, in looking at this, I can envision, you know, the travel center and everything there. To me, I think it's the perfect place. You know, you've got the, you know, where the I-35 comes in, the Cloverleaf and everything comes into there. To me, I'm familiar with your storage units, and they're very, very well kept up. And your travel centers are very, very well kept up. And to me, I think it would be an enhancement for that area for, you know, for what you're wanting to do. You know, the long-term, the hotel or motel, the RV parking, I found out myself in using the RV parking stalls and everything. I think that's a great asset to have out there. It's set far enough back down 9th Street to where, to me, it's not impeding on a big residential area and causing any problems. So, I mean, I really like the way the layout and where, you know, where you're putting it at.
Thank you.
I agree. I really like the design, which brings me to my next point, what John was talking about as well. I don't know if it's something that we could maybe keep from putting on the permanent list of the mini storage, but do it on a case-by-case basis, because, I mean, here I think it makes sense, where a lot of places I don't think it really would. This, to me, is kind of behind everything, out of sight.
So just to clarify that, if you took favorable action on those three uses, then that particular action would apply only to this property. So let's say that somebody wanted to do mini warehouses to the northwest of Hilton Garden Inn. That it's only being added as a conditional use, and a conditional use can be approved or denied based on its location. So what you'd be doing if you added these uses as added, they would be allowed
Still
on
have to be approved.
this property, but on other properties that are like the Home Edition or Hilton Garden Inn property, an applicant would have to apply for a conditional use permit, which could be either approved or denied.
Okay.
So that's what the distinction is on this property. So if you add it, you're adding it for the overlay as a whole, but as a conditional use, which means it can be thumbs up or thumbs down.
Thanks.
Okay, any more questions for staff on this? I see we have nobody on Zoom. Anybody from the public? Okay, Dean, do we want to take these one at a time?
Yeah, and I maybe, for discussion purposes, it made more sense to discuss it this way, but in terms of action, you may want to reverse the order and look at 3.3 first. And so on page 3 of the Z22-2A report, we had the options laid out that you could approve the addition of the three uses to the list as approved uses on Mr. Augustine's property as requested. You could approve some of them, but not all of them, such as recommending the travel centers and short-term RV, but not mini warehouses. You could postpone consideration. But I think it would make sense to have the Planning Commission consider whether you want to approve the addition of those three uses first and then go back and vote on the district, then you'd know whether it includes those 3 uses or not. So even though it's item 3.3, it almost makes more sense to staff for you to decide whether you want to approve the addition of those 3 uses as requested, and then go back and make a recommendation on rezoning the property and whether to include those uses or not.
Okay.
If we're going back to discussion, I don't agree with the mini storage part of it. I don't think it works in those areas, especially in that type of intersection. I think coming off of the interstate, the first thing that they're going to see is that. I like the travel center and I like the RV parking part of it, and I think that works well within that center, but I don't think the mini storages do. I think there's other locations that work better for those types of properties. So I'd be willing to do, can you bring those conditional uses back up? So I'm good with 19 and 21, but I'm not with 15. So more discussion than anything. I'm not making a motion at this point in time.
I still have no problem with 15, 19, and 21. Like I said, I don't think that they make a eyesore of any type for that area. But like I said, I have no problem with 15, 19, or 21.
I do agree with you on the view from the interstate, though.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the first thing that you're going to see. I mean,
That's going to take away from Travel Plaza or.
right, Travel Plaza Hotel, anything,
Yeah.
anything else coming back up into that area. I mean, I do think it's a good corner, and I think that, you know, your other travel centers look very well, and they're well-maintained, and I think it's great, but I do have an issue, have concerns with the mini storage part in that area. But I think everything else that you guys have done look really well and look well-maintained, and I like the photos that we'd seen before from the Abilene one on the mini storage part of it. Thought that all looked really good. So I'd be willing to approve it with the exception of 15.
Okay, you want to make a motion on that?
I can, unless somebody else wants to make a motion.
I want to ask one question for clarification, Dean. So if we say we vote for 15, 19, and 21, will it come back to us later to approve the location
Yes.
of the mini warehouse on
Yeah.
that property?
So,
Say it could go in a different spot.
yeah, so,
And we would still have to approve the look of it, too.
right. So the difference between how, if you add all 3 of those uses, the difference between how they would apply generally and how they'd apply Mr. Augustine's property is if you add those 3 uses, they're all going to be allowed on this particular property, but it's going to be subject to a site plan review. No development of the property can occur until you have approved that both the location of the uses and the design or aesthetics of them. The other difference is that on the other properties in the corridor, somebody comes in and wants to do mini warehouses or truck stops or travel plazas, you get to vote on the use. And so if you don't think the use should be allowed on that property, you can say no to the use. But if you say yes to these 3 uses on Mr. Augustine's property, then your review is limited to where they're located and how they look. But you can't come back later and say, well, I don't want mini warehouses at all.
Right.
So if you don't want mini warehouses at all, you should say that now. But if you're okay with them, subject to reviewing where they're located and how they look, then you would be including them. So that, once you say these 3 uses are okay, then your review is limited to how they're arranged on the site, and how they look. But if you say no, then the use isn't allowed at all. That's the difference.
Which is part of the reason I asked Mr. Augustine initially, because again, I don't want him to get into a property and purchasing a property and then us come back later and say, no, we don't want that in there. And if one of his main intents is to have that on there, I wanted to be upfront with him because again, I think everything else that he's doing is really good. My personal opinion is I just don't think that's a good location for mini storages. So I want him knowing firsthand my feelings on it, so if it comes to it, don't want it to come back later and go, okay, we've got it approved, I'm going to buy it. No, now you're not going to allow it in there.
I mean, theoretically, that could be, but you'd be on much less firm ground if you say mini warehouses are okay, and then he comes back with his mini warehouse plan, and you say, I don't like that, I don't want that there, when you've already gone on record saying the use is okay. So you can certainly, if a plan came back and it had the mini warehouses right at the corner of Waterwell and 9th, you could say that's not the right location for them. But you couldn't say we don't want that use there at all. So that's the difference. If you take the position that Mr. Olson's advocating, then when the plans come back at some later point, there can't be a plan for many warehouses because it's not an allowed use.
Now, he could still come back, if we don't allow it now, he could come back later and still put it into it, but he already knows initially we declined it, at least with this board, with this commission.
Okay.
If we
Mr.
decline
Augustine,
it.
you had
I have one more comment about the real estate along South 9th Street. And if you think about Riffle Drive, it's such a deep piece of property, and this one here at Waterwell and 9th Street is too. And think about those businesses in the back there on Riffle Drive. They have a hard time staying open, do they not? And because they get lost in the shuffle back there, nobody sees them. That's why we think potentially that might be a good use for that property, because that property is so deep, it's hard to get retail established all the way through that. And so because we know mini storage and because we know how to develop that, we think because of that depth of that property, it might be a good use for that. So, and plus warehouses is part of the allowed uses as well. So, you know, to me, it's 6.5, one dozen the other, whether it's mini storage or warehouse. So, but I just wanted to point that out, that we all know how many businesses have failed there on Riffle Drive, and there's a whole lot more traffic there at Schilling and 9th than there is here.
Can you pull Riffle Drive back up, please?
It's farther north. It's north of Hilton Garden Inn, Dustin.
Oh, gotcha.
So you got Hampton Inn, Courtyard by Marriott. You have the Perkins restaurant. This is the TSC store. This is now Taco John's, but it's been a couple other things.
All those restaurants along there have all shuffled and haven't been able to succeed through there. Just an observation.
One more question. John, can you elaborate on your comment? You said that Mr. Augustine could come, if we say no to 15, you said he could still come back later?
Well, what Mr. Olson is saying is that if at this point in time, the Planning Commission says they're comfortable with 19 and 21, but not 15. And let's say it's 3 years from now, and he's built a hotel, and he's built a travel center, and he still has a vacant piece in there that he can't find a use for. He could come back at that time and say, I've done this, I still think that the best use of this is mini warehouses, and I would like you to add mini warehouses to the list of allowed uses. I don't think that's what he wants now, but if you say we're not comfortable with that now, it doesn't mean if he comes back later and he's got the majority of the parcel developed, but he's got a piece that's doesn't have a use for it, and he thinks that's the highest and best use, he's not precluded from coming back and making that case then. He just wants to know up front what he can and cannot use the property for. So that's why he's included it at this time.
Right.
Hey, Dustin, can you scroll up just from 1 to 13? I just want to look at that real quick. Okay, scroll down real quick. All right, thank you. I'm good. I was just curious if there's other options that could go back there.
Okay, so we'll jump back in on 3.3. Do we want to, you want to put a motion out on that and see if it flies?
I guess I will. So going back to application Z22-2A, I would make the motion for approval of the conditional use, but with only number 19 and 21 and not 15 would be my motion.
I'll second that. You want to do it? You want me to? I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on Z22-2A to allow the conditional 19 and 21, but not 15. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Aye. That passes 4-1.
Okay, so for Mr. Augustine's benefit, that is a recommendation that would go from the Planning Commission to the City Commission. So that means that the City Commission can accept that recommendation or do something different, but that's what will be put before them as it relates to that. And then, so I have that as a 4-1 in favor recommendation. And then that addresses item 3.3. So then we should go back to item
3.2.
3.2, and that would be make a recommendation to the City Commission as to whether the overlay district should be approved with those uses requested by the applicant except for mini warehouse.
Right, and then application Z22-2 is for the change in zoning, right?
Right. And so now, in the first one, you identified what the content is, and the content is without mini warehouses. So you would be making a recommendation that it be rezoned to PC5, including 2 of the 3 uses that Mr. Augustine requested.
Okay, so then I would make that motion for Z22-2 to zoning classification change from A1 to PC5 with the 2 prior approved classification changes.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and second on that. I'm lost here, I'm just trying to think.
So his motion is to recommend approval of the Plan C5 zoning, and that the uses included would include the short-term RV parking and the truck stop travel plaza as part of that district, but
Okay, so-
not the mini warehouse.
My disapproval of the last one would not reflect on this one here if I voted.
No,
Forward,
you're
okay.
just saying you think it should be part of the corridor overlay district,
Okay.
that he's requested the right zoning for this site.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That passes 5-0.
Okay, so for your benefit, Mark, the recommendation will go to the City Commission on March the 7th. so you are free to request that they take a different view on the mini warehouse question.
Can I confirm that Commissioner Olson made the motion and who seconded that one?
I did.
Okay, I thought so. Make sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that'll bring us down now to administrative items.
We do not have any at this time. We will have, on March 1st, we had a discussion, and we're always willing to work with applicants. We've had occasions where you have postponed something to the next meeting, and it still hasn't been quite ready, so we're not going to absolutely guarantee that aeroplanes will be ready, but it has been moved to that agenda, and then we're just going to have an overview of the comprehensive plan. We're going to just highlight different land use amendments that the Planning Commission has approved since it was adopted, and then we'll talk a little bit about get an update on the bike hike plan and overview that, and then we'll hopefully have staff from Public Works be able to kind of update you on different segments that have been went from proposed to completed, so you can see how that's coming together. And so that will be the agenda for the first, and then we're going to stay right out in this area. On the 15th, we have two applications. One is an amended PC5 for, you're familiar with the property that's north of Long MacArthur Ford. They've got a plan to replat and square all that property off, and for development of the property north of Long MacArthur Ford, so a comprehensive replat and amendment for that area. And then we have a request to convert what was a manufactured home park or mobile home park on the south side of West Cloud, west of Broadway, to an apartment complex site. So those will be, I'm trying to remember, I think it's two renditions ago it was called Shangri-La Mobile Home Park, and then it became Palos Verdes Mobile Home Park, and now the mobile home park is completely gone and it's vacant, but it's been identified as a potential site for multifamily housing, so plan for that will come before you on the 15th.
Okay.
And then for Mr. Olson's benefit, the Board of Zoning Appeals is likely to meet on March the 17th as well. So,
Okay.
they've been kind of quiet, but we have two applications for that. So I can report that we had our assistant building official and code enforcement officer go out to the McAllister's site today and did some measurements and site survey. And so what we determined was that they were required to provide 25 off-street spaces. Their site plan proposed 30 off-street spaces. They actually put in 27 off-street spaces, so they had a margin of 2, but 3 less than what their plan showed, because they didn't really do a great job of striping. So when you don't, there's room for 30 spaces, but they striped it for 27. So
Is that factoring the pickup and the handicap also?
yes, it does not. The pickup window, we wanted to be clear that we have a specific prohibition. They cannot add a ordering station there. The only, and I know there's customers that are confused, but the only way you can do pickup there is you have to order ahead by phone or app and go pick it up. But you can't drive there and get in line and place an order, because there's not not room for that kind of stacking.
Okay.
And so we also went out there and did pavement width measurements for all the frontage roads there and documented which ones are already posted for no parking. So we're going to package all that together. Part of the solution, we think, is to make them properly striped, the 30 spaces, because even getting 3 more marked spaces can only help, not hurt. But that's what we're doing, following up on that. So I'd be open to any other questions about any other projects you see going on, but that we've been following up on that one, trying to figure out the source of the cars in the street. So.
I guess the only question that I would have, at least on something that we approved, was where the nursing homes going in on Ohio Street.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we at on, or, you know, I forgot who the owner is, but where are we at on readdressing his
Mr.
property?
Byquest has, he has requested and got approval from the city commission to create a benefit district to put in water and sewer lines and build the street, but that has not gone to bid yet for that. We have approved a footing and foundation permit for the nursing home, so they can go in there and do their site work and get all their footings and everything. They just can't go vertical till we have the water lines and fire protection in, but it's getting fairly close to them being able to start to put the streets and water and sewer in.
What about the tire company or the tire, or the hotel motel that was supposed to be put in by the Southern Mall?
So Dustin can give you an update on the Atwell Suites, as it's really, and I don't know, we did reach out to Kyle Kipkis, didn't we, at one point? I don't know if he responded, but we got a building permit. We approved a building permit for Discount Tire. We had it on the counter waiting to pick up. We don't release a permit till we get confirmation of who the contractors are, and they've never given us contractors or picked up the permit, and we don't know necessarily why.
I think that's a correct assessment. That from our vantage point anyway, we're waiting on them to declare who the contractor is, and they haven't selected one yet. We don't know why they haven't selected one yet. There could be a lot of reasons for that, but that's the next step to issuing that particular permit.
And Atwell's?
Atwell's, they're still planning on moving forward. They haven't got to the point of submitting building permit plans. They have amended their site plan a little bit in that they shifted everything to the north a little bit because we have a drainage ditch that's on the south side, and the city currently maintains that because we have special equipment that private citizens don't have to maintain that ditch, and they would like us to continue to maintain that ditch. And so to do that, we needed 20 feet of clearance on the south side of the hotel, kind of on the crest of the ditch where it's flat, where we can get equipment in there that has a boom arm that can get down there and mow that ditch. And so they have done some minor amendments that doesn't change what you approve, but just kind of shifts everything, if like, I think it was like 7 or 8 feet to the north, something like that. And then they're getting close to, on their end, to being ready to, from what I understand, to submit their building permit application.
Okay.
And then didn't the city commission talk about doing a study on that intersection?
Yes, there's going to be a traffic study. I don't know, Dustin, I asked you to include that map that showed the master utility plan for the Menards area. Do you think you could put that up?
I think I can.
So there's 2 traffic studies that the city is getting ready to initiate, and one of those is at the Central Mall intersection at Magnolia, where we're going to look at the volumes and turning movements there. The other thing, I think we maybe briefly discussed it, but there was a auction the first part of December where the Marietta family auctioned off this property, this property, this property, and this property. These were not included, but this was the master utility plan for this area, so water lines were brought over from Centennial Road along Magnolia into the Menards project. There was a sewer line here that comes down, and that's kind of the backbone for this area. There's a plan to do some residential development all through this area, so the city is initiating having a traffic study done to look at the Virginia Drive, Magnolia Road intersection before any proposals come forward to this, to look at options or what improvements could be done there. And then we're also looking at some grant opportunities to rebuild Magnolia Road from here all the way over to Centennial to make it look like East Magnolia instead of the way it looks now. But you can't really do much more down here without looking at the impact of what it does on that intersection. When Menards went in, there was a conclusion that a traffic signal was not warranted, but if you add additional traffic there, we may reach a point where that occurs. So the two areas where the city would be initiating having traffic studies done would be the Central Mall entrance and the intersection of Magnolia and Virginia. But what the City Commission did was they approved the Atwell project, but required them to look at making geometric improvements to that intersection there at Magnolia so that there was separate dedicated lanes for right out and left out, because right now it's not quite wide enough for that, and a lot of people are waiting to make right turns behind somebody who's waiting to make a left turn, and it's kind of muddled, so they're looking to get better definition there.
And then all the accidents at 9th and Magnolia because nobody knows how to run a yellow turn light.
Yellow turn light?
Yeah, because it's blinking yellow and it doesn't matter if I can see or not, I get to go.
Yep.
So,
Okay, so is there any other
One quick thing, and I'm done. To my prior comment for you to get in touch with Troy Long, if you could just have him just double check that code I was concerned about, section D 1043.
okay. Yes, he's been involved at both stages of we've had 3 development review team meetings of the aeroplanes proposal, and he's been at each one, but we'll see if he can be present at the next meeting so that he can address that directly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't believe we have anybody for public forum. Can I get for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you for your time, and from what Dustin and I and Margie have experienced so far, we think you may have a fairly busy spring with items coming forward. There's a lot of activity that's kind of lining up, but it hasn't yet reached a point where it's ready to come to you. But at some point, it could be a number of development proposals that you'll be looking at, and probably multiple ones at each meeting. So.